Morning, everybody. Today's hearing focuses on the very real threat of Mexican drug cartels and the lengths that law enforcement goes to defend Americans. In the last few months, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have hurled accusations at law enforcement, the Trump administration, and even Republicans on this committee. They've alleged an assault on the Constitution, national security crisis, corrupt bargaining, and a Judiciary committee asleep at the wheel. That's a quote for them. Dare they pause in their breathless accusations? The American public might remember life under Democratic leadership. They converted law enforcement into overlords of speech with their Disinformation Governance Board. A mere 3 years ago, they colluded with social media companies to quietly remove online criticisms of their policies written by their constituents. No longer able to delete Republican words, today's Democrat activists storm detention centers, shove law enforcement, and disregard police orders to scream their opinions. They defame their dissenters with allegations of quote-unquote authoritarianism. Congress didn't make this nation's laws subject to the whims of purported righteous indignation. Bruised egos don't override the First Amendment. Passionate protests don't justify laying hands on law enforcement. And bleeding hearts don't erase immigration laws critical to our national security. My colleagues wring their hands over the use of federal agents in immigration operations. They fret about the diversion of resources from cartel investigations. Need they be reminded then that under their leadership, agents were redirected from law enforcement missions to make sandwiches for illegal migrants? It was Democrats who threw open our southern border by issuing notices to report because they were overwhelmed with illegal entering migrants and couldn't issue notices to appear as required by law. These were foolish policies that paroled over 6,000 individuals on the FBI terrorist screening center watch list or with criminal records into the United States and lost track of over 2 million known gotaways. Overwhelmed by the immigration crisis they created, they released vulnerable migrant children to unvetted sponsors at unverified addresses. At the same time, they threatened law-abiding citizens with warrantless home inspections for daring to transact a single lawful gun sale. They railed against the Second Amendment as they systematically dismantled Project Thor, a key program designed to identify and prosecute cartel networks smuggling guns into Mexico. They directed overzealous inspections intended to fly-spec paperwork for errors in lawful gun transactions, all while they handed over children to sponsors, preventing overtly fraudulent documentation. Then they systematically ignored over 65,000 worrisome reports about the status of unaccompanied alien children, over 7,000 of which were alleged human trafficking. Predictably, it was under their leadership that FBI Director Wray saw, quote, unquote, blinking lights everywhere. I've heard my Democratic colleagues hold up some of these criminals as shining examples of the American dream. They mobilized their powerful platforms in defense of an alleged MS-13 gang member accused of staggering acts of violence against women and children, including abuse, murder, and solicitation of child pornography. The witnesses who sit before us today, and I thank you for being here, represent the men and women who defend America from these criminals. These are folks who enforce the law at great personal cost. As of late, they've been pelted with rocks, assaulted with homemade explosives, and defamed and doxxed by the far left. And yet they continue to hold the line against one of the greatest national security threats to America, the Mexican drug cartels. So we've had, in the last 4 years, the borders thrown open to criminals who would like nothing more than to see these men and women killed and then lost track of who entered. Democrat Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray refused to appear for their annual congressional report on threats to the homeland. So let's not forget who, quote, unquote, fell asleep at the wheel. Before I turn to Ranking Member Durbin, I'd like to play a 2-minute video that shows the sacrifices law enforcement makes to protect us from the cartels. Will you show the video, please?
American drug agent and his pilot were brutally beaten before they were killed.
In 1985, prosecutors say Caro Quintero arranged the kidnapping, torture, and killing of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. The aging drug kingpin was known as the narco of narcos. Federal prosecutors called him one of the most notorious drug lords of the modern era. Caro Quintero was among 29 cartel leaders Mexico handed over to the United States under pressure from the Trump administration. 40 years later, dozens of DEA agents looked on as Caro Quintero was brought into court in Camarena's handcuffs.
Under President Trump and Attorney General Bondi's leadership, and since January 20th of this year, ATF has prevented nearly 9,700 firearms from falling into the hands of dangerous criminals or terrorists. Over the past 4 years, cartels have infiltrated the United States through the southern border and are operating within our communities.
The DEA has said that the cartels are present in all 50 states here in the U.S.
Shootouts in upscale neighborhoods, trucks set on fire out on the highway, armed men dragging people out of their cars, and no one can stop them.
These organizations are ruthless. The way they operate is through money, and they have different shields and different ways of cloaking that money through different organizations that they own. I mean, these are multinational criminal entities that own tequila companies, media companies, popular artists. These guys are everywhere.
Senator Urban.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. I'll speak for myself, but I believe I represent the feelings of all the members of the Senate. There is no excuse for violence in political expression in America. There is no excuse for violence against men and women in law enforcement who are doing their job and risking their lives in the process. There's no excuse for that violence either in Mexico, the border states, or in the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th, when we saw the rioters come storming into the building, assaulting our men and women who risk their lives for us every day. You see them in the corridors. They're standing in the back of this hall. These are the men and women of the Capitol Police who came to our defense on January 6th. As a net result, the largest criminal prosecution in the history of the Department of Justice took place. Some 1,500 of these rioters were held responsible for their conduct against law enforcement officials in this Capitol. We all know what happened next. the new president, Donald Trump, on his first day in office, as one of his first acts of office, decided to give full and unconditional pardon to the individuals who beat up the law enforcement officials trying to defend us that day. That was an outrage. It still is. Some of these people back on the street have committed crimes again against law enforcement. It never should have happened. That pardon should not have been given. And we must remember that the president did that as one of his first acts of office. The second point I'd like to make is this. Whether or not it's in Mexico or the adjoining states of the United States, the fact of the matter is we are dealing with a terrorist organization, officially declared as such. These Mexican cartels, we know what they're up to. They are not only a major force in the politics of Mexico, they're becoming a dominant force of illegality and criminality in the United States and in Europe and beyond. Designating them as a terrorist organization, in my mind, was the right thing to do. What would we think if we learned this morning that there were firearms dealers in the United States selling firearms to Hamas in Gaza or to ISIS, terrorist organizations which we have declared to be enemies of the United States and dangerous to the United States? Outrage, that would be the feeling. Outrage at the notion that some firearms dealer in the United States is going to sell them weapons that they can use in their evil pursuits or against America and against our law enforcement. Well, that's exactly what is happening with the terrorist organizations, the Mexican cartels. They are being armed by one country primarily, the United States. Firearms dealers in this country are selling guns into Mexico to the cartels, and those guns are being used for their evil plans across the United States. I thank Senator Grassi for this hearing to highlight the threat posed by these cartels. I held multiple hearings on the cartel threat when the Democrats were in the majority, and I appreciate the committee's continuing focus on this issue. Cartel violence and drug trafficking have hit border states hard, but these criminal organizations impact all of us across the United States. Through sophisticated nationwide networks, bad actors are profiting from harming Americans and our neighbors across the southern border. We must acknowledge the role the United States has played in arming these cartels to the teeth, sending hundreds of thousands of American-made firearms south in an iron river and empowering their use of violence to traffic fentanyl into the United States. We are supplying the firearms for the Mexican cartels. Although Mexico has one legal gun shop, one in their nation, it's located on a military base. The country has faced a surge in widespread violence over the past decades as criminal gangs and cartels have illegally acquired American weapons. According to the most recent data available from ATF, 70% of guns recovered from crime scenes in Mexico came from the United States. That's a fact. Some of these guns are .50 caliber rifles. There are experts at our witness table and in this room who can tell you that is not a rifle that's going to be used in sport or hunting. These rifles are capable of ripping through armored police cars and even downing aircraft. There are American sales into the Mexican cartels that are arming them with these deadly weapons. These weapons cannot be legally purchased in Mexico, but they can be in the United States, and they're being used against our interest. In light of the cartel threat, President Trump's recent order diverting federal law enforcement agents away from combating drug and firearm trafficking and toward mass deportation efforts is particularly dangerous. It makes it more difficult for us to stop these cartels. This will only make it easier for cartel violence and drug and human trafficking to continue. Guns smuggled from the United States arm the cartels, destabilize civil society, and increase violence throughout the region. This bolsters the cartel's ability to funnel drugs into the United States, fueling our devastating narcotics crisis. Mexican cartels are responsible for a significant portion of cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine smuggled into the United States. Currently, most of the fentanyl coming into the U.S. is manufactured and trafficked by the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, who are armed with weapons sold in the United States to them. American guns are the weapon of choice for cartels. These guns fuel a vicious, never-ending cycle of violence, with drugs flowing north and guns and bulk cash flowing south. We must end this dangerous cycle before more innocent lives are lost. When I was chair of this committee, Congress passed the historic bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which created federal straw purchasing and trafficking criminal offenses, allowing prosecutors to target dangerous illegal gun runners who for decades have escaped prosecution. While this is a major step in the right direction, we must continue to build on this law to reduce gun trafficking at the border. That's why I introduced the Stop Arming Cartels Act. This legislation would end easy access to these high-powered rifles, the weapon of choice of these cartels that they use to create chaos in Mexico and allow victims of gun violence to sue gun dealers who knowingly transact with drug kingpins. Doesn't that make sense? If your firearms dealership is going to knowingly transact with these cartels, should you be stopped? Should you be held responsible? I think the answer is obvious. It's time to end the cycle of violence that has cost so many lives. And let's be clear, we will not defeat the cartels by mass deportation of immigrants with deep roots in our communities who pose no threat to public safety. If someone is here and a danger to the United States, they ought to be gone, period. Period. In order to truly weaken the cartels and cut off their ability to operate, we must stop the flow of the Iron River of guns for good and allow federal law enforcement to do their jobs instead of diverting them toward fulfilling a campaign promise. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I'll now introduce our witnesses and swear them in. We have a rare opportunity to hear from people on the front lines of cartel enforcement. So the Justice Department and Homeland Security has responded to my request to send individuals with firsthand experience on the line. Matthew Allen of Drug Enforcement Administration currently serves as Special Agent in charge of the Los Angeles Field Division of DEA, a position he's been in since December 2023. He's been with DEA 22 years, serving in various roles here in the United States and overseas in Mexico City and Afghanistan. While serving in Mexico, he oversaw all the DEA operations of Mexico, Central America, and Canada. Prior to joining the DEA in 2002, he was a police officer in Charleston, South Carolina. Jason Stevens of Homeland Security Investigation since 2025, February. Mr. Stevens served as Special Agent in charge of the El Paso Field Division. Mr. Stevens has been employed at HSI since August 2003, served in several roles along the Mexican border, the southwest region of the United States while with HSI. While serving as Assistant Special Agent in charge of Las Vegas, he and his team participated in Operation Silver Shield in July 2020, which culminated in the arrest of 21 MS-13 leaders and members. This operation effectively disrupted the MS-13 LA program's attempt to consolidate its U.S. operations. Prior to joining Homeland Security, he was a state trooper, Arizona Department of Public Safety for 10 years, and served as a Marine for 4 years prior to that. Jose Perez, FBI agent, recently became Assistant Director in the FBI's Criminal Division after serving as Special Agent in charge of Phoenix Division in Arizona. Mr. Perez has 20 years of experience in the FBI, having served at various roles: Washington, D.C., Dallas, Las Vegas, Miami. Prior to joining the FBI, he worked as a specialty pretrial services officer for 7 years at Federal District Court, Miami. Thank all of you for your service, and would you please rise so I can give you the oath? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All have answered affirmatively. Now, we'll start out with Mr. Allen, then Mr. Stevens, and then Mr. Perez. Please proceed.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I appear on behalf of the men and women of DEA's Los Angeles Field Division, agents, analysts, and support staff who work every day on the front lines of the synthetic drug crisis in one of the most strategically important regions in the country, protecting American people from those who profit in death. I wish I could begin with a statistic or a chart, but the truth is better understood in silence. In the stillness of a teenager's bedroom whose phone never lights up again, and whose laughter that once echoed through the house has gone quiet, all because of a single counterfeit pill, made for 10 cents in a clandestine lab and sold on our streets for $25. That's the price of American life today. I lead the DEA's Los Angeles Field Division. We're not dealing with street dealers and smuggling mules. What we face today in Southern California is a full-scale infiltration by foreign criminal empires, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Paramilitary organizations with global supply chains, corporate-level logistics, and battlefield tactics. Just weeks ago, we raided a cartel stash site in downtown Los Angeles, a warehouse not far from our own office. Inside, painted across the wall from floor to ceiling, was a mural of El Mencho, CJ&G's most ruthless leader, clad in a bulletproof vest and flanked by the cartel's insignia, a shrine, not hidden in the jungle or some remote compound, but right in the heart of America's second largest city. The message was clear: we're here and we are among you. During the trial of Menchito, son of CJ&G's top leader, cartel operatives were caught surveilling DEA agents and informants right here in Washington, D.C. As a direct result of the capture and prosecution of Menchito, CJ&G struck back in Mexico, shooting the wife and killing the daughter of a cooperating informant and killing a Mexican army soldier. This is who we're up against: paramilitary cartel with global reach, willing to kill families and surveil U.S. personnel on our own soil. This isn't just crime, it's terror. We later uncovered that El Mencho's own daughter and son-in-law were living in a gated community in Riverside, California, just down the street from the chief of police. When we executed that warrant, we seized garbage bags stuffed with Rolex watches, designer shoes, luxury handbags, totaling over $2.5 million in assets and over $1 million in cash. These people were not hiding in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight, shopping in our stores, sending their kids to our schools, and laundering death through the American dream. These cartels do not just destroy lives, they destroy communities. They exploit our ports, highways, banks, and increasingly our immigration system. While many who cross our borders seek opportunity and refuge, cartels weaponize chaos. They flood smuggling routes with both poison and people. They recruit from migrant populations, coerce cooperation through fear and debt, and use human life as both shield and currency. The border crisis isn't separate from the cartel crisis. It's one and the same. In recent days, the streets of Los Angeles have been rocked by unrest related to immigration enforcement. Let me be absolutely clear. The DEA's role in immigration is narrow, targeted, and mission critical. Through our Title VIII authority, we support immigration investigations that directly intersect with drug trafficking and violent crime. We cannot ignore the cartel-linked smugglers are actively embedded in these networks. And when they embed, they do not just traffic with people, they traffic power. Power that turns into fentanyl, firearms, and fear. What's happening in Los Angeles right now is a symptom of something far more dangerous. Criminal networks that sow chaos and try to erode public trust, because cartels thrive when our institutions are divided. But we are not divided, not in DEA. We are united by duty, by mission, and by memory. Earlier this year, the Los Angeles Field Division helped to bring to justice the man who orchestrated the torture and murder of Special Agent Kiki Camarena nearly 4 decades after his death. because in DEA, we never forget and we never stop. Whether it takes 4 weeks or 40 years, if you harm the American people, we will find you. If you take one of our own, we will bring you to justice. That's not a motto, that is a promise. We are proud of the work we've done in Los Angeles, targeting cartel leadership, dismantling synthetic drug operations, and reclaiming neighborhoods block by block. But pride alone won't stop the next overdose, or dismantle the next lab, or freeze the next $10 million in dirty crypto. That takes resolve and resources. I, not just as a DEA agent, but as a dad, am extremely grateful for the bipartisan passage of the Halt Fentanyl Act. But we need this committee's continued bipartisan support to continue to fight across every shadow that this cartel hides in. The cartels do not retreat, but neither do we. Behind every investigation, every arrest, every seizure, there's a child who should still be alive, a mother who should still be smiling, and a community that should still be whole. This is not just a public health emergency, it's a moral one. And we will not stop, not until every child has a chance to grow up, not until every parent can open their child's bedroom door and find life, not loss, on the other side. Because the families can't wait, this crisis won't pause, and the cartels won't stop. DEA is not new to this fight, but the fight is changing, and we're ready. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. It is a privilege to represent the men and women of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations, the principal investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security. We are not just federal agents. We are committed public servants whose purpose transcends policy or protocols. A passion to show up every single day with one mission: to protect the American people from threats that know no borders. Threats that cross the borders, infiltrate communities, and exploit our travel, trade, financial systems, and our vulnerable populations. HSI agents are driven by duty, not by recognition, and I am proud to speak on their behalf. Today, I'd like to speak to you about one of the most urgent and dangerous of those threats, cartels, and the risk law enforcement faces to repel these foreign terrorist organizations and those who provide material support. These networks are not just trafficking drugs. They are trafficking violence, destabilization, human suffering, and death. They are adapting constantly and operating with global reach. And how we frame the mission defines how we face it. And HSI is built to face that threat. We have nearly 8,800 personnel across 243 cities and more than 90 international offices. We partner with over 4,500 task officers from federal, state, local, other departments, giving us unmatched reach and a unity of effort. We don't just chase criminals, we dismantle criminal networks, from transportation networks to international finance to command and control. But this isn't about law enforcement. It is about national security. Perspective drives presence. How we see the threat shapes how we show up to solve it. In Executive Order 14157 recognized what our agents have seen in the field for years. The cartels, Sinaloa, CGNG, MS-13, TDA, don't just operate like terrorist organizations. They are terrorist organizations. This designation allows us to treat them like such and to act decisively, to be able to freeze their assets, cut off finances, disrupt their logistics, and prosecute both foreign nationals and U.S. citizens who provide them with material support. Last year alone, HSI launched over 7,000 drug trafficking investigations. We made more than 10,000 arrests and seized massive amounts of methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl, along with illicit proceeds. But fentanyl continues to devastate families and communities across America, and so we continue to adapt. Internationally, our agents are embedded in 55 countries. We exchange information, coordinate investigations, facilitate enforcement actions, and participate in joint missions with our foreign partners, partnerships that lead to real preemptive disruptions. Since January, those partnerships have resulted in major seizures and arrests before the drugs ever even reached our U.S. borders. At home, we're going after the cartels and through their financial networks. These organizations are increasingly relying on Chinese money laundering organizations to move and repatriate their billions in illicit proceeds. HSI is targeting these networks, following the money, freezing the accounts, and cutting off the oxygen that fuel cartel operations. And at the heart of our future posture and our forward strategy is a new model, the Homeland Security Task Force, or HSTF. This is a HSI and FBI-led effort, along with our partners from DEA, ATF, and our state and local partners. It is a true team of teams where we will work together to bring down the cartels. We will continue leveraging our expertise, our tools, and our partnerships to confront these threats head-on, to protect our communities, defend our children, and uphold the rule of law. Thank you for your continued support of HSI, and I look forward to your questions today.
Stevens, now Mr. Perez.
Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and other members on the committee. Thank you for having me here today to discuss the FBI's efforts to combat Mexican cartels. I'm privileged and honored to represent the men and women of the FBI, particularly the Criminal Investigative Division here today. The FBI has long prioritized the fight against violent gangs and transnational.
Could you pull the microphone a little closer, sir? Pull your microphone closer, please.
Sorry, sir. The FBI has long prioritized the fight against violent gangs and transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, particularly cartels, that traffic dangerous drugs like fentanyl across our borders and drive the drug crisis in our country. We've led major investigations through our Safe Streets task forces and organized crime drug enforcement task forces, working side by side with federal, state, and local partners to disrupt drug pipelines, target gang leadership, and dismantle criminal networks. What we face today is more complex and more violent and more interconnected than ever before. To be clear, the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division is laser focused on the cartel's trafficking of dangerous narcotics like illicit fentanyl across our borders. As of today, the FBI has over 6,000 cases targeting TCOs, with over 850 linked to cartel leadership, including TDA, MS-13, and the Sinaloa cartel. Tackling these networks means addressing every link in the chain, including the street gangs that help move their product, launder money, and enforce violence here at home. This isn't just a border problem, it's a nationwide public safety crisis. To effectively dismantle these interconnected networks, the FBI and HSI are spearheading the creation of the Homeland Security Task Forces, stemming from the administration's executive order on protecting the American people against invasion. HSTF strengthened our operations by expanding our reach, improving real-time intelligence sharing, and targeting threats at every level. HSTF's focus on disrupting TCOs engaged in drug and weapons trafficking, money laundering, homicide, kidnapping, and other federal crimes, both in the United States and around the world. This robust coordination is backed by significant resources. More than 2,200 FBI special agents and over 3,900 task force officers across the FBI are dedicated to full-time targeting violent gangs and TCOs. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation is a powerful tool in the FBI's fight against cartels. It enhances intelligence collection, deepens collaboration with our partners in the intelligence community and military, and enables DOJ to pursue investigations related to these charges, including material support against cartel members. Since January, we've made over 500 gang-related arrests, more than half involving members of FTO-designated organizations. We've also expanded watch-listing efforts to capture more cartel and gang affiliates. Earlier this year, the FBI's vetted team in Mexico captured one of our top 10 most wanted fugitives linked to numerous acts of violence against civilians and rival gang members. These actions are part of the broader FBI strategy that targets threats at all levels through the multi-pronged approach. Currently, the FBI has more than 6,200 active investigations into local neighborhood-based gangs, many tied to national gangs like 18th Street, Mexican Mafia, Bloods, and the Crips. These gangs often act as vital partners to the cartels, expanding their reach and helping evade law enforcement. Through our Safe Streets task forces, with more than 2,500 arrests this year already, we work with our local, state, and other federal law enforcement partners to dismantle violent street gangs using the enterprise theory of investigation, enabling tougher federal charges for the entire gangs. Just this month, an FBI Atlanta investigation in partnership with DEA led to the largest fentanyl seizure in Georgia's history, valued at $9 million, with the arrest of a convicted felon. That's enough fentanyl seized in that case to kill 4 times the state's population. In Newark, 30 people are now facing federal charges for narcotics and firearms trafficking-related offenses related to fentanyl and crack cocaine. We're also targeting darknet opioid sales with our Joint Criminal Opioid Darknet Enforcement, or J-Code team. Just last month, in Operation Raptor, the J-Code group identified 270 dark web vendors, buyers, and administrators in 10 countries, including the United States, and arrested them on federal charges, and this led to the seizure of more than 2 metric tons of narcotics. These aren't just investigations or statistics for us, though. It's personal. Violence and drugs are flooding our neighborhoods, showing up where kids play and ride their bikes and walk to school. These drugs end up in the wrong hands, destroying lives and fueling fear. These violent gangs also target the brave men and women in law enforcement who put on the badge every day and risk their lives to protect our communities. I can tell you agents have been forced to take cover while being fired upon or attacked and threatened, but it doesn't stop us from doing our jobs, and it underscores why increased efforts like those of the HSTF and the FTO designations are essential. Congress also plays a critical role in our efforts. Continued support for resources, legal authorities, and improved technology allows the FBI to stay ahead of rapidly evolving and ever increasingly sophisticated threats posed by these dangerous organizations. In conclusion, I want to reiterate the FBI's unwavering commitment to this mission as a top priority. Thank you for your support in this area, and thank you for your continued assistance in helping us combat this threat. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee, and I look forward to your questions today.
Thank you all very much. We'll have a 5-minute round of discussions. On our side, it'd be this order: Grassley, Cornyn, Lee, Blackburn, Schmidt, Brent, Moody, and Graham. On the Democrat side, it'd be Durbin, Whitehouse, Klobuchar, Blumenthal, Arano, Padilla, and Schiff. Mr. Allen, there's a long and tragic history of cartel members targeting American law enforcement. So please briefly elaborate on threats that you and the agents you work with have received.
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to do that. As mentioned in my opening statement, we have instances of cartel members surveilling DEA agents here in the United States. Additionally, in my 22 years plus with DEA in the Los Angeles area and in other areas of the world, I've experienced several instances of cartels and criminal organizations surveilling our people, watching our people, both in Mexico and the United States. It's not uncommon when our agents leave an operation, such as a search warrant or an arrest warrant, to notice surveillance behind them and have to call perhaps like a black and white marked unit from a local police department to have the car stopped. Of course, we have follow-up investigations that stem off of that. And then, of course, there's the obvious, the danger that the men and women of DEA face every day, conducting enforcement operations, conducting search warrants of that nature. I've lost personally several friends on this job, 2 of them very close friends of mine. So, yes, sir, it's a dangerous job.
Thank you. And Mr. Perez, Tom Homeland disclosed that the Biden administration released 1,272 Iranian nationals into the United States, crossing the border illegally. According to news reports, Iran has threatened to activate its sleeper cells inside the United States. How is the FBI preparing for potential sleeper cell activation by Iran?
Thank you for your question, sir. Obviously, terrorism is a top priority for the FBI. It has been for many years and continues to do so. We are reprioritizing resources, currently surging resources that are already sitting against the counterterrorism threat, leveraging our intelligence, our partnerships in this field to address those cases, those individuals, particularly on any potential entries that may have occurred. The benefit now is we've been working collaboratively for several months on immigration enforcement with our DHS counterparts, and I feel that we're well positioned now more than ever to leverage that tool as a resource to potentially lead to immediate disruption if that situation presents itself. Obviously, this is handled more so by our counterterrorism division, but we are well positioned to address that threat currently.
Okay, Mr. Allen, in 2024, your agents arrested El Mencho's son-in-law, Riverside, California, where he posed a nonviolent immigrant running a lawn business. He leads the CJNG, a violent cartel that flooded the United States with fentanyl and murdered hundreds of individuals. El Mencho's son-in-law was part of the cartel leadership. What presence did El Mencho's son-in-law establish in California, and how did he do it?
Sir, yes, sir. I believe you are referring to the arrest of Mencho's son-in-law, Christian Gutierrez Asiega. working off of information provided on a tip, my agents established surveillance at a residence that they believed that he was living at in Riverside, California. It quickly came to our attention that he was living in a gated community just down the street from the chief of police. So he was in the country because he was fleeing Mexico. He was wanted in Mexico for the kidnapping of some Mexican Marines. So he faked his own death, he got a new name, and he came to America. He was living right in the neighborhood, as I said, with the chief of police, living a life of luxury. I think we shared some of the photographs with this committee as far as the search warrant went, with luxury watches, handbags, things of that nature. But yes, sir, he was living out his life here in the United States.
Okay, Mr. Stevens, I've got half a minute left, so I'll quickly ask you this question. Members of this committee have cited misleading data regarding who's bringing fentanyl into our country. What have you learned about this tunnel that I was supposed to describe for you, the tunnel between Juarez and El Paso, about the tunnel, and how does it caution against relying solely on seizure statistics at port of entry for determining how drugs are smuggled into the country?
Thank you for your question, sir. That tunnel is under investigation. We've indicted 2 individuals on that tunnel. So far, it was approximately 4 by 6. 2 individuals of my size could walk through that tunnel side by side. So we had significant concerns because it could have individuals transiting through the tunnel, obviously unknown and undetected by law enforcement. We know that there could be contraband brought through the tunnels as well, and we also know that money as well as weapons could be smuggled south through that tunnel. It had a lighted system in it. It also had ventilation, which would allow them to be able to walk through there and see where they're going, and also comfortably walk through there without any breathing issues at all.
Okay, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. My thanks to you and your organizations and the men and women who literally risk their lives for us every single day to stop this narcotics crisis. I thank you for that, and I hope you'll convey that feeling to them as well. I'd like to read something and see if any of you disagree with this. Cartels have flooded the nation with illegal firearms sold by U.S. gun manufacturers in Mexico. The Mexican government estimated that around 200,000 U.S. sourced firearms are smuggled into Mexico annually. Do you disagree with that? I see no disagreement. The hope is that the United States can do something about the flow of firearms from our country into Mexico to these cartels. Heavily armed cartels use military-style weapons and other weapons to assassinate politicians, attack the military, kill and injure judges, journalists, and police, terrorize ordinary citizens throughout Mexico. The cartels traffic fentanyl and other drugs into the U.S. and spur migration, and they're using these same weapons against your men and women in law enforcement. Is that a fact? Have you heard that? Do you disagree with that? No disagreement. In January, the Justice Department reported a 25% increase in crime gun tracing requests from Mexican authorities in recent years. Over 3/4 of crime guns recovered in Mexico are traced to 4 states: Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, according to the Justice Department. Has that been your experience as well, that is a large source of these illegal firearms coming from the United States to the cartels? The answer in the affirmative. It's also noteworthy that 90% of gun dealers in the United States do not sell guns into the crime gun pipeline. If you act safely, as most gun dealers do, you would not supply a crime gun pipeline. It's only a small percentage of gun dealers who sell virtually all their crime guns, and manufacturers have been told not to supply those dealers. Are you aware of that effort? Have you heard anything about that? It would seem that that would be a critical part. Now, this is a tough issue. When we get into firearms, we start talking about the Second Amendment, and we choose up our sides and go to the respective corners. It happens here on this committee, it happens in Congress, and it happened here today. I listened carefully to your presentations, each of you. Mr. Allen, you mentioned the word firearm one time. Mr. Stevens, you referred to the ATF. Mr. Perez, you referred to weapons. This seems to me to be a major element, arming the terrorist groups called the Mexican drug cartels. Do you think that the end of this problem necessarily involves doing something about weapons shipped from the United States into the hands of the Mexican cartels? Mr. Allen?
Sir, I think one of the best tactics that we have at our disposal to combat that is the formation of these Homeland Security task forces. It's probably the greatest collaborative effort I've ever seen, taking on this whole government approach, and more specifically, this whole federal law enforcement approach at combating these terrorist organizations that use our own freedoms against us on a regular basis. And I can stand before you now and tell you that it's definitely one of the greatest collaborative. There's egos aside, sides aside, everyone is in this fight together.
Can you tell me what is being done to stop the flow of firearms from the United States into the hands of these terrorist cartels selling drugs?
So specifically on the firearms issue, I would have to defer to my colleagues at the ATF, but I can tell you that with the formation of these task forces, you're seeing increased information sharing and increased intelligence sharing, and I think that's going to go a long way to.
Mr. Stevens, what's your experience?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. As he said, with HSTFs, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. We are bringing all of our superpowers, unique powers, and authorities together in one room. We work daily with the ATF in Texas and New Mexico to ensure that we're having an understanding of what's going on as it relates to their straw purchasing. Also, understanding HSI's role and our partnerships with Customs and Border Protection. We're ensuring outbound inspections are done. We've continued working operations in the El Paso region, and over this past last two operations we've worked, we've seized over 19,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammo, over 60 rounds of 50 caliber, 400 rounds of 22, seized 3 rifles, 4 pistols, 150 cal. So we're working every single day to ensure that stuff that's exported out of the country, contrary to law, that we stop that before it gets into the hands of the cartel.
Are you identifying the gun dealers in the United States that are supplying these Mexican drug cartels with these firearms?
We are allowing ATF to work that back. We're working on the exportation piece and trying to identify the network that it's going to. We're providing that information with ATF, who's partnered with us in every single endeavor that we do, and they're taking and working it back to the gun store.
I'd like to ask Mr. Perez to respond, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perez?
Sir, I know we spent a lot of time today talking already about fentanyl, but the focus of our cartel investigations or gang investigations are broadly focused. These organizations are polycriminal. They're involved in gun trafficking, narcotics trafficking. When we're talking about investigating the cartels, we investigate all elements of it. So whether it's the money movements or the trafficking in firearms, the illicit trafficking in firearms. If we identify any co-conspirators that are complicit as a part of that, as conspirators in that cartel, we're going to investigate that to the full extent we can.
Excuse me, does that include American firearms dealers who are selling these guns?
So again, in an investigation, anyone who's complicit in that conspiracy potentially, who we find to be complicit and is prosecutable, we're going to present that obviously for prosecution.
Have there been prosecutions of these gun dealers in the United States?
I don't have any firsthand anecdotal examples, sir. Again, I would defer to ATF that handles more of that piece specifically. I will say, sir, though, just in the last 6 months through our cartel and gang investigations, we've seized close to 4,000 guns nationally, but about 2,200, sir, along our border offices. So as we investigate more aggressively the cartels, the gangs, we will encounter firearms, illicit firearms, and encounter how those firearms have landed in the hands of these criminals.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call on Senator, I want to remind everybody in this area that Senator Durbin's been talking about, that Senator Cruz and I have introduced a bill that we call Protecting Communities and Preserving the Second Amendment Act. A section of that bill would establish law enforcement-run task forces along the southern border to combat cross-border gun smuggling. So far, we don't have bipartisan support, and I would beg for bipartisan support. But this is partly an answer to the fact that under the Biden administration, they didn't implement the new rules that would work with the federal firearms licensees. It's a valuable source. That's a valuable source of intelligence for law enforcement community. And that effort was lost. Go ahead, Senator Cornett.
Thank you all for being here and for your service to the nation. It's critical work. But sometimes I feel like we're bailing a sinking boat. And I think if I reflect on it, there's a couple of reasons why that's the case. One is we've seen for the last 4 years an open border policy, which basically was an open door to criminality, gangs, human trafficking, drugs, and the like, which made the United States a very lucrative market for the work of the cartels that we're here to discuss. The second, and I want to direct this to you, Director Perez, we have a partner, so to speak, in Mexico to deal with some of these issues, but in fact, corruption in Mexico is a long-standing endemic problem. One report recently said that in a review of the activities of state-level anti-corruption prosecutors in 5 Mexican states, out of nearly 6,500 investigations opened, only 22 convictions were achieved. Yet we depend on the Mexican officials and their vetted units to work with our intelligence community and our law enforcement agencies to go after the fentanyl labs and the cartels. But what do we need to do? Or is there anything more we can do to address the corruption issues in Mexico? It seems like President Trump has gotten the attention of President Sheinbaum, and certainly the extradition of the 29 individuals was a positive sign. I don't recall that ever happening before under any previous president. But what do we need to do to try to address the problems of corruption in Mexico?
Thank you for your question, sir. While obviously corruption is a significant issue in Mexico and other countries that we work in, there's also a lot of cooperation. We continue to build on that cooperation. We have probably our largest legal attaché office for the FBI. Our largest international offices is throughout Mexico. We do work with vetted teams. We have our partners within Mexican law enforcement, as we do in other countries, that we've trained, that we've vetted, work with, and try to build bilateral cooperation, and have had a number of successes. So again, corruption does exist. It is an issue. It is an issue we're aware of. We try to build on that capacity. That's part of our legal attaché, our overseas mission, is to build that capacity, build that trust. We've brought those vetted team officers, prosecutors to our academies in Quantico, Virginia, not just for Mexico, but from other countries, to try to, again, build that capacity, work on these cases. I will say, sir, to highlight, including that extradition, we've had a number of other successes over the years in Mexico. Those successes come directly attributable to the cooperation with Mexico. So again, we want to try to build on the positive there, work through any of that corruption, work as best we can to try to build their capacity, and hopefully continue to work towards bilateral success.
Mr. Stevens and Mr. Allen, do you feel like our ability to make progress in this area against the cartels should be dependent on cooperation of the Mexican government? Or are there things that the United States ought to be doing unilaterally to address this threat?
Thank you for your question, sir. I think HSI is uniquely placed with some of the largest vetted units in Mexico, along with our attachés and the agents that we have down there. While we have seen corruption, what we're seeing now is increased cooperation. We've been working through capacity building, and we've seen commitment from them, to include a success that we've had earlier this fiscal year of the seizure of the largest amount of fentanyl ever seized in Mexico's history, which was 1.5 tons of pressed fentanyl. So we have had some successes in that space, and we're going to continue and try and build on that with our current attaché teams.
Mr. Allen?
Sir, I would actually echo my colleague's words about cooperation in Mexico, but also his words about corruption in Mexico. I spent 2 years in Mexico myself. I had a front row seat to it. Historically, there is quite a bit of corruption in Mexico. I am optimistic, though, with President Sheinbaum's administration, and especially Secretary Omar Harfuch leading the Mexican Security Department, whom we have a history with. As far as directly to your question, I think unilaterally, bilaterally, any tools that we can bring to save American lives to this fight, I'm for.
Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you for your good work. In March, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota indicted 11 people after federal law enforcement, state, local partners worked together. As you know from the horrible tragedy this last week in Minnesota, we have a good team of law enforcement that work well together across the board. They broke up a Mexican drug cartel trafficking ring that smuggled large amounts of meth from Mexico to the Twin Cities, in addition to drug trafficking. They also were charged with kidnapping people in the Twin Cities who owed them money. From my past experience for 8 years as the DA for Hennepin County, which is the largest county in our state, where the murders occurred actually this last week, I know how important to have that coordination. And Mr. Allen, could you talk about how we can create better coordination between agencies, lessons learned over the last few years?
No, happy to, ma'am. DEA, historically, speaking for DEA, I can say that we historically participate in a lot of task forces. As a matter of fact, in the Los Angeles Field Division, probably two of our most productive groups, enforcement groups, are task force groups. They consistently lead the division in seizures and arrests and prosecutions. And I think that speaks to the ability of task force environment to get things done. I think it speaks to the benefits of information sharing, of working with our partners, and we plan on to continue doing that, especially with the formation of these Homeland Security task forces. As I said before, this is probably the biggest, collaboration that I've seen in my career in attacking this problem.
Mr. Stevens, I actually went to Mexico once with some other senators and Cindy McCain on the topic of human trafficking and some of the relationships with the cartels on that front. In 2023, the president signed my bill with Senator Cornyn to support survivors of trafficking. And of course, your agency plays an important role in combating human trafficking. There have been numerous reports of Mexican drug cartels turning to human trafficking as another illicit revenue stream. Could you talk about that connection with the transnational cartels and human trafficking?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. I'd like to extend our condolences and thoughts and prayers to you and your community up there. That was extremely unfortunate and heartbreaking. HSI has the the Center for Countering Human Trafficking that exists here and is supported by teams that cover over sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. They support HSI investigations and other investigations around the country. Obviously, we've seen gangs and cartels they use and they focus on sex trafficking as a revenue stream for their criminal activity. We've seen that in our TDA cases. We've seen that in our MS-13 cases, where they traffic individuals that have come into the country and are vulnerable and exploitable, and we're continuing investigating those. In fact, we have 43 indictments against Tren de Agua as well as the Anti-Tren currently that we've been able to put out, and correction, that'd be 34 indictments on those organizations for sex trafficking.
Really appreciate it. And Mr. Perez, again, at the FBI played a major role in tracking this killer, and I want to thank your agency for that. And I just had a question about Mexican drug cartels profiting off of arms trafficking, kind of similar to the human trafficking, and using that flow of money and firepower to expand their enterprises. Could you comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. As I commented before, our focus is on the cartels, on the individuals. We're not tied to one specific unique violation, if you will. The cartels, our adversaries are not. They're not tied to one region. They're not tied to one location or one violation, which is why we believe in that task force concept, where maybe there's a lot of things that the FBI can do. There's a lot of things that HSI can do. There's a lot of things that DEA can do, our state and local partners as well. Any success I've ever had working cases or leading teams in the FBI has been directly attributable to task forces, state, local, federal partners. So again, we look at that polycriminal type of angle, and we address that by bringing in different resources. So we work closely with the ATF as part of the HSTF, and even historically, again, with DEA. So really the goal there, ma'am, as just occurred recently in your hometown, in that unfortunate case, that case was worked in a very collaborative sense.
I know, yes.
We leveraged state resources, federal resources to lead to whatever the most effective result is to bring closure to that.
Thank you. Thank you. And Senator Grassley, just one very quick question near and dear to both your hearts on social media, just 10-second answer here. Mr. Allen, 1/3 of drug cases had direct ties to social media. Do cartels use social media to traffic narcotics around the country?
Yes, ma'am. Cartels
you.
are involved in that.
Thank you.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, we are watching closely what the cartels are doing on social media. It is a point of concern. Senator Klobuchar and I have done a lot of work in that space. Mr. Stevens, want to come to you in your role there at HSI. And I think that you probably recognize how important state and local participation with ICE is as we are apprehending the criminal element in these gang members that are tied to Tren de Aragua and MS-13. One of the things I've worked on for the last several years is the CLEAR Act, which that legislation would codify the 287G program and thereby enabling local and state partners to more easily work with, with ICE. And I know you started out as a state police officer. Talk a little bit about the importance of having that state and local participation with ICE as we do these apprehensions.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. This is extremely important. As the special agent in charge for HSI El Paso, I have a very unique footprint. I have a boot in the state of Western Texas, or the Western District of Texas, where we have extreme support from law enforcement. We're able to work with all the state and local agencies. I also have a boot in New Mexico, which has more regulations. I have successes in all of those locations because I have great partnerships, but it shouldn't depend on great partnerships. In my role as a special agent in charge, I have to have political conversations with law enforcement leaders instead of public safety conversations. Our goal as public safety leaders across our agencies is to be able to go in and see how we can most help our state and local partners, because I wished as a state trooper I would have known what I knew now. And so for me, having that ability to have those conversations without putting my state and local partners in a bad position with their mayors or city councils or governors, that's extremely important.
So codifying 287G would simplify that process.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that. Last week, I had the opportunity to do an ICE ride-along in Nashville and see firsthand how the process is working, and also to talk with our ICE agents in Nashville. I think there's a lot of concern about the increase of assaults, a 500% increase on these agents in the last few weeks. One of the things we've done in response to the mayor of Nashville and his office that doxed our federal law enforcement officers, ICE and HSI, as they were conducting some of these raids. They've apprehended 554 illegal aliens, criminal illegal aliens, since May. So it's been quite an effort, but we did legislation that would make it illegal to dox federal law enforcement officers and immigration officials. And we're surprised that that had not been done, and so we have legislation with committee right now that would do that. I wish that I could hear very quickly from each of you, just 10 seconds or so, about how these efforts to dox law enforcement, including our ICE officers, ultimately jeopardize their safety, security, and their families. So, Mr. Stevens, I'll start with you.
Thank you, ma'am. I've experienced that with one of my own employees who was photographed during an operation. It was put out on Instagram, and the individual that had posted that had indicated that the community needs to remind him where he came from and where he was. And so for me, that's extremely, extremely important. My employee felt such threat from that he completely changed his appearance to be able to protect his family when he's off duty and out in the community with them. Thank you.
Mr. Perez?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, that would be significant, any type of legislation to prevent that. It's a significant threat. The doxing poses a tremendous vulnerability. Just to highlight one example we're currently dealing with, an agent is being threatened with photos. The problem is exacerbated by social media, by technology that allows them to maybe quickly identify somebody through a photo. But in this doxing incident, the agent is being threatened, but also with pictures of his children, to back down on the operations that are ongoing at the fear of doxing or potentially some type of threats towards his family. So a significant threat that we're concerned with, ma'am.
My time has expired. Mr. Allen, quickly, anything to add?
Yes, ma'am. I would say doxing is clearly an attempt by others to keep law enforcement from doing their jobs through the threat of exposure, through the threat of violence, and putting people's families out for public scrutiny.
Thank you. Yield back.
Senator Ronald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know that there is a significant flow of firearms from the United States into the hands of these cartels. And I'm glad that Senator Durbin asked you all the question of what we can do to stop this flow, and most of which are coming from 4 states, Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas. And you all testified that, you really don't know what to do, that you kicked it off to the ATF, that they're supposed to be trying to stop the flow, the significant flow of firearms out from our country to Mexico. So that's your testimony, right? It's not your responsibility. It remains with ATF to figure this out? Anybody?
Yes.
You stay with that's not your responsibility. That's your testimony.
No, ma'am, that's not my testimony, ma'am. I'm sorry, just to correct.
Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, so at least on the piece of the...
What you can do?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes, ma'am.
Briefly?
So for us, we do see that as one of our responsibilities, and we're going to do that through the HSTFs, as that's one of the pillars of efforts that it refers to as it relates to that. So we're working and using our unique authorities to be able to work that together. So we are working hand in hand with them daily on operations as it relates to the outbound weapons.
Can you provide the information to this committee, what success that you are having in stopping the significant flow of firearms, and who are the people in our country who are selling these firearms? So I want to move on to the fact that you all work for agencies where we know that there is resources have been diverted from each of your agencies probably to engage in immigration enforcement. President Trump has made it clear that immigration enforcement is a priority for his regime. And to that end, for example, the FBI has reportedly been ordered to prioritize immigration, with some agencies being told to dedicate 1/3 of their time to immigration enforcement. So I would like to ask each of you, Mr. Allison, what percentage of DEA personnel, either through diversion of the hours of time that they're spending on immigration reform to bodies who are spending time, what percentage of DEA is going to immigration enforcement?
Ma'am, we don't really quantify it by percentages of people. I will tell you this, that the DEA's involvement in any type of immigration enforcement is focused and narrow in scope, and we are primarily focused on the narcotics trafficking that oftentimes...
So you don't know what percentage of DEA is going toward immigration enforcement?
I can only speak for the Los Angeles Field Division.
I'm sorry?
I can only speak for the Los Angeles Field Division of DEA. In my role.
I'm having some difficulty hearing you. So is it your testimony that you don't know?
I can't speak to that.
Okay. Thank you. The information I have is 25% of DEA is going to immigration reform. Mr. Stevens, what percentage of HSI is going toward immigration enforcement?
Thank you for your question, ma'am. I can't speak for the entirety of HSI. I can speak for my HSI El Paso field office. Each field office is unique and has its own major threats. And so the SACs have autonomy to be able to divert those resources, to be able to necessarily address immigration, drugs, whatever happens to be the major threats. I have human smuggling occurring in my offices daily, so I have a significant number of resources dedicated to what would be referred to as immigration enforcement.
And what percentage, what constitutes significant to you?
I have approximately 4 groups that are dedicated to working human smuggling investigations, which would be about 28 people in my El Paso office.
The information I have is that it is unclear as to what percentage, if we can talk about it in those terms. It would be helpful for us to know what kind of diversion of resources is happening toward immigration reform, as opposed to the law enforcement and the drug enforcement activities that you all are supposed to be engaged in. That in the case of HSI, it is that scores of agents have been reassigned, literally reassigned to immigration reform. FBI, Mr. Perez,
Ma'am,
what percentage of FBI resources are going toward immigration?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have an exact percentage. I
Enforcement?
can tell you that over the last several months that we've been involved in it, supporting our DHS counterparts, the number ebbs and flows from smaller to maybe surges at time or two. I will tell you, though, the success of what we're doing in the immigration front, when we first started, we've identified close to 800 predicated FBI subjects that were in violation of some type of immigration status. We've been able to leverage that tool, that partnership, to disrupt everything from terrorists to spies to gangs.
Excuse me, I am running out of time, but I just want to say that these are important questions for us to know, because you all are supposed to be, you have your mission. One wonders if, for example, the information I have is that with regard to FBI, 45% of agents in 25 large field offices are working immigration full-time, 45%. So, and as for the ATF, 80% are working on immigration enforcement at least part of the time. So there's a significant diversion of resources toward immigration reform as opposed to the stuff that you all are supposed to be doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up with that, I hope you do more deportations. I hope you help find more criminals. And I hope we send them either back to their home country or somewhere else. And it's on that point that I want to use my time to sort of address something here. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding a hearing. I have listened for 6 months to Democrats on this committee for any President Trump nominee that comes here, grilling them about whether or not they're going to follow the law, whether or not they're going to abide by court orders. And through 1,000 different ways to ask the same question, they give the appropriate answer. President Trump, by the way, in his first term and now in his second term, has abided by every single court order. So this newest fake constitutional crisis, and we're on to another one today about Article 2 powers this weekend. There's just a new fake constitutional crisis from the Democrats every single week. But on this one in particular, it is worth pointing out what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday, a radical, liberal, progressive, leftist judge, Brian Murphy, who was confirmed in the lame duck session when Joe Biden, President Otto Penn, may not even have known he was appointing this person, approved by the Democrats in the Senate, is now refusing to obey by a Supreme Court order for the deportation of 7 criminal aliens. And let's just do a little bit of tail of the tape. These people are, one of them is a convicted arsonist. Another one is an armed robber. Another one is a murderer of an elderly woman. 2 more are murderers. One is a child rapist, and another is a rapist of a person with special needs. These are the people that the Democrats spend their time defending. And now we have a judge, through an act of, dare I say, insurrection, which is a word that's thrown around here all the time, is refusing to abide by the Supreme Court's ruling to say, yeah, actually, when you held up these deportations, you were wrong. We are ordering you to allow these deportations. This judge, Brian Murphy, decided to cite the dissenting opinion, and say, you know what, I'm going to give the Supreme Court the middle finger. I don't want to do it. So for all of the nonsense I've heard on this committee about every judge, including the ones from Missouri that were put forth, every nominee, including Pam Bondi, every single person in the administration that's come before the committee, there is sort of righteous indignation to sit here and act like they have the moral high ground on obeying court orders and the rule of law. It's all a lie. And the mask has come off because Brian Murphy has shown what this is really all about. The Democrats believe in that, but only when it suits them. In this issue of illegal immigration, I can't actually believe they're doing it. I can't actually believe that this 80-20 issue, the American people want to meet mass migration with mass deportations, period. And their willingness to allow assaults on law enforcement officers who are doing their jobs is insane. What you will not hear, you've heard some Democrats disavow the violence, but what you will never hear any one of them say is that, you know what, we need to take a step back and let ICE do their jobs, because they don't really want ICE to do their jobs. They're totally fine with a bunch of leftist radicals who invaded the White House with President Autopin. They can't believe their luck. They were writing white papers about open borders, and then they were setting policy, throwing our borders open to 15 million people who are here illegally. And when a president comes in after campaigning on the idea that he was going to deport these 7 people, including an arsonist, a rapist, a murderer, of elderly people, of people with disabilities, that's the line. That's the red line. And now you've got a judge willing to back them up. So this is outrageous. And I don't think it's going to last for very long, but I applaud you for what you do every day. You don't get a lot of thanks. You're put in a impossible position. And I've seen what's been going on in California. It's ridiculous. If you're here illegally, you don't have a right to be here illegally, period. End of story. And guess what? The law says you can be deported somewhere else, like in this case. And the Supreme Court just affirmed that. And now we have a rogue, liberal, leftist district court judge who doesn't want to abide by it. So I don't want to hear any Democrat on this committee who voted for this guy, by the way, ask a Republican nominee if they're going to abide by court orders, because who they voted for isn't doing it. So you want to talk about a real constitutional crisis? There it is. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Whitehouse. Thanks very much. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for your service in the work of defending the country from the danger of the international narcotics cartels. Is there anyone here, any of you disagree that the business model for the cartels, fentanyl cartels and others, is that they send product here, they sell it, they get money, and they bring money back? Pretty fair, everybody agrees? 3 for 3? Yes. That's the way the business of drug distribution works. Does anybody disagree that there is, in fact, an international system for hiding those illicit proceeds, the money that comes back, that those funds get secreted away in locations where they're hard for law enforcement to track, for instance? 1, 2, 3, yes, yes, yes. Let the record reflect. Yeah, because that's really what is happening out there. Now, in the Narcotics Committee, which I chaired in the ranking on, and which Senator Grassley has been heavily involved with, we have had testimony with respect to the focus of much of our enforcement activity and how our enforcement activity tends to focus far more on the product distribution side than on the money going back and being stashed side. Do any of you disagree with that? Is there room for improvement in our investigation of the money flow of the cartels back to the various financial havens where they hide it? Yes, 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 room for improvement. So we have, and just by the way, I'm as guilty as anyone. I was a U.S. attorney. I was an attorney general with full criminal jurisdiction in Rhode Island. I've done the cases. I've laid out the drugs and the guns and the money on the table. I've had the press conferences. I've done all of that. But the more I learn of this market, the more I see that we really need to drill into the financial underworld, the international financial underworld that supports the cartels. And while we're at it, crooked oligarchs, kleptocrats who've robbed their country, criminals involved in international child trafficking, smugglers, anybody who is up to evil and making boatloads of money from it is out to hide their money someplace. And now that market is robust enough that it'll take all comers. And we need to be much more aggressive about going after it. In that context, do drug smugglers and traffickers use American shell corporations to hide their assets and to hide their activities?
Yes, Senator, in my experience, yes, they do, amongst many other techniques.
Yeah.
Trade-based money laundering, capital flight out of China, storefronts, things of that nature. And the DEA has actually taken a very aggressive stance against that. We use a lot of different tools at our disposal, not least of which is making use of OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, in freezing assets and freezing businesses of people connected to cartels that we believe are using those businesses to launder money.
Yeah, and I really appreciate, we've had very good hearings with DEA about understanding the need to up the enforcement against the financial side of the business to match the enforcement against the production and distribution side of the business. And I'm eager to support you in doing more of that. I will make 2 points as I close. One, the current Treasury regulations for implementing the Corporate Transparency Act, a bipartisan effort in which Senator Graham and Senator Grassley and Senator Crapo were heavily involved, along with myself and members on our side, completely fails at the mission of protecting against the abuse of American shell companies by drug lords and others. They need to up their game, and I say that as a public message here to everyone. Second, the law enforcement cuts that are coming are at odds with the added work we need to do going after this illicit international financial network. Taking down the kleptocracy work at the Department of Justice, I cannot comprehend. So I hope that we can work together in a bipartisan fashion to rebuild the strength and power of the United States law enforcement to go after these illicit financial enterprises that are supporting drug trafficking and other crimes and make them feel some pinch.
Thank you. Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and I'm sure you have many in the audience that are here for support. As the wife of a career law enforcement officer, a former DEA agent, I thank you for signing up for these dangerous jobs, putting your safety behind the safety of others, and continuing to persevere in the pursuit of law and order. The promise made to a nation under a rule of law a long time ago that we continue to promise to this day, even when so many back away from it, even those that are often put in charge of this nation. I've been here a hot second. I'm the newest member, not only of the United States Senate, but of this committee. And I have learned quickly why the American people often get frustrated with Congress. We are here today specifically for a hearing entitled "The Thin Blue Line Protecting America from Cartels." And I had to listen to the ranking member talk all about the harm that is being caused in Mexico. And I had to hear about another member accuse you of using too many resources to enforce the law, and the harm that that might be having in other nations and not America. And I sat as Attorney General in Florida for many years and listened to President Biden as he called Mexico a great partner, when in fact the president of Mexico suggested that the fentanyl crisis, which kills over 100,000 people a year, is an American problem. And so it is important, I think, to point out that you have leaders in Congress that are purporting to want to help you solve the crisis of the cartels and the deaths in America and the damage to our communities and our families, but yet we're focusing all on what's happening in America or in Mexico. When in fact, maybe we should concentrate on the harm to Americans and this country first, which is what the president is trying to do. In fact, you heard the ranking member out of the gate say, oh, I think these cartels should be labeled foreign terrorist organizations. Well, he was the chairman of this committee for the last 4 years. And you know who declared these cartels finally foreign terrorist organizations? President Trump and the agencies working for President Trump. In fact, as AG, I called for that for years under Biden, pleading that it would bring more resources to bear, more law enforcement agencies in partnership with the fight. And it fell on deaf ears. In fact, do you know how many hearings we had in this committee over the last 4 years under President Biden? Under Democratic leadership on fentanyl? Zero. Zero. So I want to thank you. As many politicians and leaders in states around this nation undermined law enforcement, tried to defund them, encourage attacks on law enforcement right now as they're trying to do their jobs, that you and so many men and women in law enforcement, not just federal, but state and local, stand bravely and strongly on that thin blue line because they know what it means to be a free people under a rule of law, and that is that you need men and women willing to take the criticism and the attacks and do their jobs and enforce the rule of law. And the fact that you three and so many like you proudly took the oath and wore a badge for so many years, putting your safety behind others, like myself and my family, I want to proudly and make it a priority to say thank you. In fact, everyone up here should publicly say thank you, and to every law enforcement officer out there right now, especially through the last 4 years, as President Biden broke down the border and unleashed drugs, cartel members, those who had barely been vetted into our communities. And you know who held that line? Who showed up every single day and put on a bulletproof vest to protect us in the face of that danger? Law enforcement. They stood on that thin line between chaos and order, between good and evil, for us, and in a broader sense, for this country and what it means to live as a free people under a rule of law. So publicly and proudly, I say thank you. And I want to ask, what do you need to protect America and this nation and our people first and foremost? Because the last person that had that job abdicated that responsibility to an auto pen. So we need to say not how can we first help other countries? How can we first help other nations? How can we first help America? Because we know from the time President Trump was in office until Biden, those on the foreign terrorist watch list that were let in went up 2,500%. What can we do to protect America first and foremost and give you to do your jobs? Let me ask you, Mr. Perez.
Can you give short answers, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for the comments. I would say the number one challenge for us on the resource piece, obviously human resource is an issue, but really I think continued focus on ensuring that we have the best technology available, the best equipment, the best resources as an agency, as a government, to combat these threats, to combat all types of threats, whether it's terrorism or cartels, ensure we're using and utilizing the most effective technology out there to be more efficient at fighting crime.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you done?
Well, I'm never done, but since time is out, I will be done.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, thank all three of our witnesses for your service and for your participation here today. Been sitting here for a few minutes and observing from my office as well. I know there's a lot of passionate comments that have been shared on both sides of the dais here. And I'll try to stay as focused as I can on policy and to be driven by, I think, some key data points, which are helpful for this discussion. And I would begin by recognizing, and tell me if you disagree, but Mexican cartels rely heavily on firearms, which we understand are trafficked from the United States, including military-grade weapons like sniper rifles. Now, while Mexico has strict gun laws on the books and only one legal drugstore, our understanding, our intelligence tells us that it's U.S.-based straw purchasers and rogue dealers who play a significant role in arming transnational criminal organizations. According to ATF, up to 500,000 U.S.-sourced guns are trafficked to Mexico each year, undermining both U.S. and Mexican law enforcement efforts. I'm not seeing any no nods from all of you, so I assume you're agreeing with me so far. I associate myself with a question and issue that Senator Durbin raised earlier about what role United States-sourced firearms play in enabling cartel violence and drug trafficking operations. So I want to sort of follow up on that and ask first you, Mr. Stevens, what role do unlicensed sellers, gun shows, or online marketplaces play in firearms trafficking to cartels? And if you can, just as a follow-up, how has HSI adapted its investigative approach in response to these challenges?
Thank you for your question, sir. So as it relates to gun shows and the gun shops, that would be the straw purchasing piece, which ATF is the primary lead on. We work with them hand in hand. I know you guys probably get tired of hearing about the Homeland Security task forces, but it is a great concept now because we're not just collaborating, we're co-located and we're co-mingled to work together, and we're talking every single day, greater than what we've ever done in my 32 plus years. And so we're working with the ATF to ensure that if they have a straw purchaser or they believe that the weapons are going to be exported in southbound, that they're working with us. And we're working hand in hand with our Customs and Border Protection partners to ensure that we have outbound operations and inspections going so that weapons and ammunition and currency isn't southbound and getting into the hands of the cartels.
Yep. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your response
Yes, sir.
Clearly. When I mentioned the examples of gun shows or online marketplaces, coordination is great. Are you suggesting that because of the new communication coordination with other agencies that the online marketplaces and the gun shows are no longer a challenge or a concern, or do they remain a challenge and a concern?
I must have misunderstood your question. They absolutely remain a concern, sir.
Okay. So again, I'm glad I asked a follow-up for clarity. So what new strategies are being adopted, particularly through this newfound coordination, to help address those, or what new strategies would you recommend to be able to tackle the challenges of online marketplaces and gun shows?
So I think the way the HSTF, or the Homeland Security Task Force, is going to work out of El Paso, it is co-led by the FBI, SAC, and myself. As we sit together, we're going to have debriefings or briefings from our intelligence teams, and we're going to have a greater understanding of what each agency is seeing as it relates to the cartels, what the major cartel threats are within our corridor, and the same with the weapons trafficking. And so we're going to be able to have a greater understanding as a whole and be able to focus as a whole of government to be able to address that.
I would love, as a follow-up to this hearing, to hear more about what recommendations or policy changes come of those conversations, because we're at more than 5 months into this administration. A lot of these task forces and operations are not new, so I'm eager that some of the improvements come sooner rather than later. You mentioned the FBI. I have one more question for Mr. Perez. How does the FBI coordinate with other federal and foreign partners, for that matter, to trace the firearms recovered from cartel-related crimes? And as a follow-up to that, what new tools would improve your ability to hold the traffickers accountable?
Thank you for the question, sir. On the firearms tracing south of the border and really domestically too, again, that is ATF's primary role. We submit our firearms to trace through the ATF systems. But again, the recipe for success there, as we've talking about, Homeland Security Task Force is a co-located or a joint environment where we're working these cases side by side. I'll go back to my earlier comment, Senator, when I talked about our focus, though, on these cartels. We're not focused on one particular violation. We're not just focused on fentanyl, even though I know we're spending a lot of time speaking about that. We're focusing on these groups themselves and all types of crimes that they commit. And as I mentioned previously, sir, through our investigations, collective investigations, just this year alone, we've seized close to 3,000 firearms in our investigations. I'm sorry, close to 4,000, over 2,200 along our southwest border offices. So as we continue to aggressively and better investigate these cartels, these groups that transit in fentanyl and in drug trafficking and other human trafficking, also in firearms, we're going to encounter firearms trafficking. We're going to encounter how they get them, how they move them, and anyone else who's complicit in that environment.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, just in wrapping here, I know my time is up, only because I've heard so many of my colleagues raise the issue of the current immigration enforcement actions, not just in Los Angeles, but particularly in Los Angeles. I'm hoping you've seen reporting of Cato Institute research and findings that more than 90% of the migrants that have been detained since October, so the beginning of the fiscal year, do not have serious criminal convictions. If this was indeed truly solely targeting dangerous, violent criminals, there would be no disagreement, there would be no debate. But what we see in practice is much different than that. So to the extent that you're all just focusing on the dangerous, violent criminals with that criminal history and or convictions, we applaud you. Enforcement beyond that, I think that's a worthy subject matter of discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before Senator Graham, I want to put in the record without opposition, letter from the President, Matthew Silverman, of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, speaking about some of the trouble that law enforcement people have. Senator Hawley's going to chair the committee. Senator Graham, you go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate what you do for our country and all those like you out there. So I want to associate myself with Senator Whitehouse. I think we need to get to the root cause of funding and all the shadow organizations that actually benefit drug cartels. You all agree with that, right? The money laundering is real. Senator Badia's concerns about drugs, arms coming from America into Mexico, arming the cartels, that's very real. I'd like to do something about that. But my question is, do we have a willing partner in Mexico? The question for me is the government of Mexico in charge of their country, or is it the cartels when it comes to drugs and human trafficking? What would you say, Mr. Stevens?
Thank you for your question, sir. Currently, Mexico is being a good partner with us. They've increased our transnational criminal investigative unit footprint there, which allows us to take investigations that are occurring on U.S. soil and expand them into Mexico, helping us better identify
Why are the cartels so strong in Mexico? I mean, is it fair to say that there are parts of Mexico they control completely, Mr. Perez?
Thank you, sir. Again, I'll go back to my earlier comments that there is obviously corruption is prevalent down there. There's areas where
How much of Mexico is under cartel control?
I don't have any numbers, sir. Part of our mission down there, sir.
10% of the country, 20% of the country?
I can't comment on that, sir. I can
Okay.
tell you that part of our mission.
Can you get back with me about it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Allen, why is it such a problem in Mexico? You know, he talked about corruption. Is the government serious about dealing with cartel problems in Mexico?
I think historically that's been one of the biggest obstacles that we faced.
Has it changed dramatically?
We do have optimism that it is changing, sir, yes.
Okay. Well, that's good. You get back with me. Do we know where there are fentanyl labs operating today?
I don't have that information with me.
No, I mean, you have to pinpoint it, but is it fairly well known where some of these labs are?
We routinely receive like informant information and reliable information.
Is that right,
that
Mr.
tells
Stevens?
us where these fentanyl labs are at, yes.
Yes, sir. I know we have some information. As I indicated previously, we had one of the largest seizures in Mexico's history of pressed fentanyl of 1.5 tons, and that was related to information we provided to them. We've also identified...
You provided it to them?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Mr. Perez, has there ever been a joint operation between the United States and Mexico where we partnered with them and went into Mexico to take down a drug lab?
Yes, sir. I'd say we've partnered with them more on the intelligence piece. Obviously, Mexico's...
No, I'm talking about going down and actually taking the thing down.
Where we are physically there conducting operations, sir, I'm not familiar with any.
So how many people a year die from fentanyl poisoning coming from Mexico, Mr. Allen?
Fentanyl poisoning itself, tough to say. The number of people that passed away in 2023 from drug overdoses and drug poisonings was about 107,000. Approximately 70% of that is related to fentanyl, sir.
Okay, so that's a lot of people, right?
It's more than Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq combined.
Just hear what the gentleman said. It's more than all those wars combined. President Trump talked about using military force against drug cartels. Do you think that would help, Mr. Allen?
Sir, I can only speak for my position as Special Agent in charge of L.A. Those are decisions made at the Department of Defense and DA headquarters, and I'm not prepared.
So he's openly talked about taking down some of these drug cartels and laboratories by using military force. I would encourage him to keep thinking that way. Generally speaking, is Mexico the problem or the solution, the government, when it comes to drug cartels? Mr. Allen.
I think they're in a unique position to be both.
Well, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, that's where it comes from, sir. So that would be a
Mr.
problem.
Stevens?
I agree with the same comment. I think they're uniquely positioned to be both.
But are they more the problem or the solution?
I think they can be both.
No, that's not the question. You got to pick. Do you know?
I would say right now they're a solution for us. They've been actioning our information. We've provided them.
Okay. Mr. Perez, do you agree with that?
Yes, sir, I agree with that, and their cooperation is the solution. I will also say that many...
So you think the Mexican government is providing solutions to the cartel problems?
They are providing solutions, yes, sir. They could provide more. There's more capacity there, and we're trying to build on that. I will also say that members of the Mexican law enforcement have died serving action on behalf of the United States
I appreciate
government.
that. So we had testimony about a month ago, quite the opposite. Just seems to me that they're mostly the problem, not the solution, because there's so many of these organizations operating out in the open. They literally have control of large parts of Mexico. So I'm glad to hear they're doing better. But from my point of view, they're not doing enough. Senator Schiff, then Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and thank you for your public service. Greatly appreciate it. I served for almost 6 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, worked very closely with the DEA when I did. In fact, worked on bringing to justice one of the people involved in the kidnap, torture, murder of Enrique Camarena. So I was interested to see the video at the outset of this hearing and thrilled when I learned of Caro Quintero's extradition to the United States. Mr. Allen, I want to ask you a couple questions about your work in L.A. I'm grateful for all the efforts to stop the scourge of fentanyl and the smuggling in this country, which has killed so many Americans. My questions go to the fact that I want to see that focus continue, and I don't want these questions to be perceived as a criticism of you. You're following the instructions you're getting from headquarters. But I am concerned, and for the reason that Senator Padilla alluded to, that to the degree that your resources are diverted to immigration operations against nonviolent immigrants, against farm workers or garment workers or restaurant workers, I am worried about diverting the focus away from interdicting fentanyl and going after these cartels. So let me ask you, how many field agents do you have in LA?
So approximately 200.
And of the 200 field agents in LA, how many of them have, in the last 150 days, worked on immigration enforcement?
That's a tough question to answer, sir, just because it's such an ebb and flow. It's not like we have people permanently assigned to just work immigration enforcement. Because, as I said before, we're really primarily focused on continuing our work in drug enforcement, and the crossovers that fall into place with illegal immigration. I mean, that's where we
give us your best ballpark. Have a third of them been assigned at least temporarily, or half of them, or more? Is everyone participating to some degree?
I would say at any one time, that's a decent estimate, but as again.
Sorry, which estimate? About 30%?
At any one time, not necessarily at one time, but at any given time. There could be 5%, there could be 2%, there could be 30%. It just depends on what's going on that day and what type of support we can offer.
But give us some sense. I want to know what kind of call on your resources this is.
Well, I can actually give you a couple of good examples of things we've done recently.
I'm really not looking for examples. I'm looking for how much your workforce is being diverted to immigration enforcement and away from things that they were doing previously.
Well, specifically immigration enforcement only, that's not what we're focused on. It's just not, sir.
Okay, so how many of the 200 agents have worked in immigration enforcement?
At any given time, anybody could.
No, just overall. Have all 200 been called away at some point to work on immigration enforcement?
No, sir.
Okay, so how many have?
I really would have a hard time giving you an answer on that, sir.
You're running the office.
I am, yes.
And you're having to make decisions about allocating resources.
Yes, sir.
And you've got investigations to pursue that were ongoing at the time of the administration. And you're having to take agents off of one thing to put them on another. I know how strapped the resources were even before this administration.
Yeah.
So you may not want to be precise here, but we need some sense of what kind of resources are being diverted here. So what percentage of your agents would you say, what's your best estimate, what percentage have been called to do immigration enforcement? What percentage of the 200 have at some point in the last 150 days been called away to work on an immigration enforcement action?
Sir, the reason I'm having a hard time answering the question is because we work immigration enforcement as it relates to narcotics enforcement. So the two are intimately combined, and that's what our agents are doing.
Okay. Well, for instance, you know what I'm asking you. With all due respect, you know what I'm asking you. So, what percentage of your agents have been called away to work on immigration raids? That is a departure from what you were doing before 150 days ago.
Sir, my people do not do strictly immigration raids.
What percentage of your agents have worked on immigration enforcement in the last 150 days? Can you give me an estimate?
Again, it's not just immigration enforcement, sir. So
okay. You clearly don't want to answer the question, Mr. Allen, and this is part of the problem, and that is we are devoting, by some estimates in the FBI, 45% of our agents in major cities, it's a public report, to immigration enforcement actions that are 90% of which going after nonviolent offenders. You're taking them away from somewhere. You're taking them away from somewhere. And you clearly don't want to tell us how much you're taking them away or how much work they're doing on this and what other enforcement actions, what other interdiction they might be pulled away from. But we need answers. Mr. Perez, are the estimates accurate that 45% of agents in major cities are being called on to work on immigration now? Is that accurate?
No, sir, I would say that's not entirely accurate. I think that maybe comes from some data that looked at
So what is the accurate percentage?
So nationally, sir, I don't have an exact percentage. I would say it's probably, it ebbs and flows. It could be between 5 to 10%. But again, that's been a temporary surge. We're realigning and we're surging now towards potential terrorism threats.
And the 5 to 10% that are being called away to work on immigration, what were they working on previously?
It varies, sir, by office. It depends. But we have a history in the FBI, sir, of surging resources towards terrorism or cyber attacks or cartels. So those are decisions made by our field offices to potentially pull someone off of an assignment. But I would say that's common, sir. In the 100+ years in the FBI, we surge resources, we realign resources for potential threats.
Well, I don't think there's anything common about the scope of what you're being called upon to do with these immigration enforcement actions. But I know my time has expired, and I yield the mic to Senator Britt.
Thank you very much. On the note that we were just talking about, the stuff that I have read is that actually the seizures of drugs have gone up, particularly at ports of entry, since we've seen a more secure border. Is that correct in what you've seen, that we've had an opportunity to seize more drugs at those ports of entry?
Speaking on behalf of HSI El Paso and our response to Customs and Border Protection, we're seeing increased cases as it relates to cocaine, and we're seeing increased seizures in cocaine.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, I had an opportunity to interact with some HSI agents over the weekend, just top shelf, first class. And to all of you and the men and women who work with you, thank you so much for what you do. And I think it's critically important right now that we continue to focus on this. We know that fentanyl death, fentanyl overdoses, fentanyl poisoning is the leading cause of death between the ages of 18 and 45 in our country. We have seen, obviously, the previous administration continue to kick the can down the road, and this administration is taking it serious, making sure that we are using every tool in our toolbox to keep Americans safe. When we look at the nexus between moving that fentanyl and drug cartels and gang members, I'd love to know from you all, any of you, how many drug cartels, gang members, the number, so to speak, do you feel like, and those agents kind of sort of working with them, do we have in the interior of the United States by your estimate? Anybody?
Do you mean individual groups, ma'am, or?
Yeah, like number of people that are associated with those groups, either
In
drug cartels, gang members, et cetera.
Well into the thousands, ma'am.
Wow. 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 When you are looking at the nexus and how this works, how the cartels utilize these gangs to move this product around the country, can one of you tell me a little bit about process-wise, kind of how they do that?
Ma'am, in my experience, the cartels, specifically the Mexican drug cartels, often use the street gangs in the United States as kind of their foot soldiers to carry out some of their dirty work, to carry out, retail distribution, things of that nature. I think, and I know I don't mean to sound like a broken record to keep going back to the Homeland Security task forces, but one of the things I think that's great about that and helps us address this problem is it allows every agency to bring their expertise to the table. I would reference, FBI's expertise in dealing with violent street gangs and that nature, HSI with the ports and with the chemicals, DEA with our expertise in cartels. I mean, I think we bring it all together to fight this fight.
And we really appreciate you all working together, utilizing your strengths to make sure that we're putting the American people in a safer and stronger position. And I commend President Trump and his administration for making this a priority. When you're looking at the supply chain of how this works, obviously we've talked a lot about China and China's role in these fentanyl precursors and coming here. Is there anything that we need to be doing to be more disruptive to that supply chain from your perspective?
Thank you for your question, ma'am. In HSI El Paso, we have one of our agency's national initiatives, Operation Chainbreaker. And we are looking at pill presses, pill dyes, molds that are being imported in. Obviously, you mentioned the precursor chemicals. The De Minimis Act is really hurting and harming us right now because anything under that $800 threshold is not being subject to search or customs inspection. So that allows these parts and pieces to come in. We're seeing significant numbers of pill presses, dyes that are being brought here. We've, as part of Operation Chainbreaker, we've found over 50 labs set up here in the United States that are now producing fentanyl.
Wow. Okay, when we're talking about China, obviously everyone, that's been well documented. DEA more recently mentioned India. Are there other countries or bad actors that we need to be kind of putting into focus here?
India is really the only player I think that comes up on the radar besides China. But let me be clear, like at a much smaller scale.
Okay.
I mean, our focus is definitely needs to be on China.
And as we look at what's happening across the country right now, what do you think the next fentanyl may be? Are you seeing something that is bubbling up and you feel like has the unfortunate opportunity to kind of catch hold here in the United States? And then if so, what can we be doing to be vigilant to warn that off?
I think, ma'am, one of the more emerging threats is not necessarily a new drug itself, but the combination of drugs. For instance, people have been taking xylazine, which is like a veterinary drug, and mixing that with fentanyl. Why that's so dangerous is it basically cancels out the effects of Narcan. So it's because it's not a synthetic opioid. We've had some pretty good, the public has had pretty good success with Narcan in reviving people and bringing them back from the brink of overdose. But when you put outside things into it as an adulterant to cut it, all in the name of profit, it cancels that out. So it's very dangerous.
Absolutely. And last thing, what should we be doing to better target the financial networks that aid and abet the cartels, including their operation and presence here in the United States?
I would just ask for continued accountability from any type of financial institutions, right, that provide resources that can be exploited or when folks are complicit, but just additional support to law enforcement to abide by lawful process and things that we need for some clarity.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for what you do.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Tillis, thank you, Senator Tillis. We had to do a chair transition there. I'm not going to cover most of what's been covered in the hearing. I think my colleagues have done a good job. I do have one question that relates more to marijuana trade. I want to go down this line of questioning. First, what insight do you all have with the cartels still growing and distributing illicit inputs that are getting into the state legal supply chains? Do you have any intel on that?
The cartels are still very much involved, sir.
Very much involved, and I mean by involved by a lot. And this is, but it's a little bit different now because it's not necessarily dealing on the street, but it's having inputs going into what become legally available products in the states that have legalized marijuana or cannabis extracts. That's what I'm getting at. Mr. Perez, were you about to say something?
Sure. No, just to add to that, for cartels, we've seen timeshare fraud cases. So they continue, just because marijuana is illegal, maybe, or legal in certain places, cartels are going to continue to find ways to make money regardless of whatever the environment is.
Yeah. It just seems to me that I've tried to keep pounding the table and saying, folks, those of us who were not necessarily eager to legalize pot have lost. The majority of states have legalized it at some level or another. I don't really have a whole lot of emotions about it personally, but for the fact that I don't think we're regulating it properly, and I do believe it's just become another distribution channel for the cartels. Now I want to talk about something a little bit closer to home. I really need some help from DEA to answer this question. How does a pot growing facility in North Carolina that's not connected to the boundary of the eastern band of the Cherokee somehow get produced here, get grown here, the extracts are created here, and then magically find itself in through a patch of land that is not boundary, and then find itself for sale? I mean, how can I get an answer from the DEA on how this magical process occurs where something's transported in an illegal area and it's not viewed as an illegal activity? Mr. Allen.
Sir, what I can comment on is what we recently experienced in Los Angeles, and I apologize, I'm not as familiar with.
I wouldn't expect you to be briefed up on this, but.
Yes, what I can comment on is we had a similar instance in the Los Angeles area recently last week, where our people raided a almost 800 acre, if you can imagine that, 800
growing
acre.
Operation?
Yes, sir. And it
was it a legal growing operation?
No, sir. And it was on tribal land as well. And
interesting.
As a result of that operation, we actually uncovered there were 47 Chinese nationals on the property who are here illegally. We believe as a result of human smuggling, because many of them were locked into their temporary living quarters and locked into their working areas. So it touches a
well,
lot.
I need some help because the boundary in North Carolina, for those who don't know, the boundary where the eastern band of the Cherokee are, it's out in the very end of the state, near where South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee all North Carolina all converge. They've got a growing, they have a right to sell marijuana I guess, as a recognized tribe, but they're growing in one place and selling in another place. Not only are they, and let's face it, folks, it's a casino operation, it's a destination. People are buying this stuff. You'd have to be out of your mind to think that they're going to dispose of whatever's not used by the time they leave. So we're moving to this island where it's legal, and then people are driving out. That people got to just take responsibility for transporting things they're not supposed to legally, but they're growing it in a patch of land that's not connected to the boundary, and I've got to believe that that's an illegal transport. At what point does it become trafficking? Because this is at scale. And so it's something that I'll be reaching out. I have with the prior administrator, Milgram, and I'm going to reach out and just give me a definitive answer. If it's a legal enterprise, fine, but I've yet to get an answer to it, and I'd like to get a crisp answer. I don't know. The other thing I want to say here is we're seeing stuff, Tutti Frutti. I don't know. Is that an adult targeted segment kind of name there? Or does it feel a little bit like you're attracting the younger audience for this sort of thing? And then maybe you are, because the chief of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee is saying kids are getting testing positive for pot. So I wanted to use this here. I get the other part. The last thing I want to leave you with, I'm worried. I mean, we've got to get this under control. We have to realize that pot is going to be legal in this country in one form or another in virtually every other state. We can either figure out how to regulate it by putting a U.S. Department of Agriculture regimen in, an FDA regimen in, the same way that we do with alcohol and tobacco, or we're going to get way down the road without control over inputs. And the next thing the cartels are going to do is figure out how they can put other in the race for potency. Once they run out of how you can actually do this through the plants, they're going to figure out some way to make this more potent and more deadly. And I feel very strongly that we need to have a separate meeting about how do we create a construct that if states want to opt into, they can, not make it legal federally, or this is getting out of control. And this Eastern Band of the Cherokee anomaly is one example of what happens when Congress fails to act on something that I think it's time for us to act on. On behalf of the chair, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Thanks for the excellent work that you're doing. Fentanyl has been a major topic of discussion today, rightfully so. Fentanyl accounts for 70% of the drug overdose deaths in the United States. It's the leading cause of death, fentanyl is, in my state, the state of Missouri, for individuals over the age of 18. And we don't produce it in Missouri. It comes to us from across the border. It comes by the truckload, it seems, these days. Every community in the state, every school in the state is awash in fentanyl. And what I'm particularly concerned about are the latest efforts of cartels to send rainbow fentanyl into our borders, across our borders. I'm sure, Mr. Perez, you're familiar with this, the phenomenon of rainbow fentanyl, which is made to look like a candy. In fact, obviously, it's an extremely deadly drug.
Yes, sir, generally familiar with it.
Is it safe to say that the Mexican cartels are using rainbow fentanyl as a deliberate attempt to drive addiction among young people, among kids and young adults?
Yes, sir, I would say they're using fentanyl in general, regardless of who they're trying to addict. Yes, sir.
So here's the next thing that concerns me is that we've got the effort by the cartels to use rainbow fentanyl. We've got the effort by the cartels to target kids, and they're doing it more than they're selling it in ways other than just the classic back alley deal. They're using now social media apps in order to sell fentanyl. Let's take a look here at one example. This is from the big tech platform Snapchat. Snapchat's one of the worst offenders here. The Snapchat's platform, as you may know, features disappearing messages, anonymity. It also has real-time mapping features that make it easy for drug traffickers to access clients and especially young people. Snaps are often accompanied by code words and emojis that are designed to evade detection by law enforcement. In February of this year, a mother, Bridget Noring, sat where the three of you are sitting and testified. She lost her child, by the way, her 19-year-old kid, lost him to a fentanyl overdose after he got fentanyl through a Snap message. And she testified, sitting where you're sitting, that she went to Snapchat. She alerted them to the kind of snaps that they have got that are posted on their platform. And she testified, here, this is a quote now, the first three things out of their mouth, meaning the Snap CEOs, were, number one, we have no idea this is happening on our platform. Number two, as parents, you should have been monitoring your child better. Charming. Number three, you can't sue us because we're protected under Section 230. Now, my question to the three of you is, wouldn't it be a big help to your efforts and to our efforts as a country to stop the flow of fentanyl and other illegal drugs into this nation and from flowing into the hands of our kids if we shut down these platforms from selling and offering drugs and being a major platform for drug traffickers? Mr. Perez?
Yes, sir. I would go back to about accountability from any institution that's facilitating this. I know our efforts through the J-Code, which I mentioned earlier, focusing on darknet and opennet type of trafficking, that's significant. We spend a lot of efforts on those types of cases.
Yeah, very good. I'm glad you used the word accountability. I think that's exactly what we need. And right now, I just want to point this out so everybody understands it. Right now, Snapchat and every other big tech platform have exactly zero accountability. Zilch. This is on their platform. It is there constantly. It is there in volume, and there is currently nothing any parent, any victim can do about it. I mean, just refer back to what this mother said the Snap CEO said to her. It's your fault. We don't really have any idea about it. This is after she told them it was on their platform. And by the way, they know. I mean, if these guys can direct the most precision advertising to you using their AI algorithms, you think they don't know that there's this kind of advertising all over their platform? They know. And then they said, the get out of jail free card, you can't sue us because we're protected under Section 230. I've said this time and time again. It is time for this Congress to take action to allow victims to hold accountable these companies when they put this kind of garbage, this sort of illegal activity on their platform. Victims ought to be able to sue Snapchat and any other big tech platform that traffics in this kind of illegal activity. And until Congress changes the law to allow victims and parents to sue, I think that this is just going to continue to go on. Let me give you one more example. Mr. Stevens, I'll direct this to you since I know that you're in the El Paso division. Here is an example of a Mexican cartel using a different social media app to try and hire American citizens to participate in human smuggling. So this is the kind of thing that's going on Snap, on Instagram, on TikTok, where these cartels are recruiting American citizens to come be smugglers, offering them pay, giving them instructions. And once again, they are using these social media apps, these big tech platforms to do it. Let me just ask you, Mr. Stevens, have you encountered this? Have you seen the cartels trying to recruit Americans to participate in their smuggling operations?
Thank you for your question, sir. Yes, we have multiple cases involving human smuggling as well as drug smuggling where they use those social media platforms to be able to recruit drivers.
Wouldn't it be a help to you and your law enforcement activities to be able to turn off this kind of illegal activity on these platforms? In other words, to reduce the supply of American drivers who are willing to participate in a human smuggling ring?
Yes, it would, sir.
We need to do it. And the way to do it is to hold these social media companies accountable, to use your word, Mr. Perez, to allow victims to sue the social media companies for violating the law, for violating basic human decency, for lying constantly to their customers and the American people. I've already introduced legislation that's passed this committee unanimously to allow victims of child pornography to sue the platforms. And I can tell you the next step is to allow victims of human trafficking, victims of this kind of illegal trafficking in narcotics to sue the platforms. If we can do that, I think we can begin to make a dent in this tidal wave of fentanyl and other narcotics coming across our border, and I think we can begin to hold these social media companies accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of the chair, I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this hearing. Written questions can be submitted for the record until July 1st at 5 p.m. I'll ask that the witnesses to please answer and return the questions to the committee as quickly as possible. This hearing is adjourned.